Another way to use semicolons is in a list that already contains commas. Like I said, semicolons in a sense function as commas. But if the list already contains commas, semicolons can come in. Now, here's an example. Look at this sentence. We have offices in Lagos, Nigeria, London, England, and Tokyo, Japan. This looks like six different places, but actually there are three different places. What I'm basically saying is we have offices in Lagos in Nigeria, London in England, and Tokyo in Japan. So what we do here is this. We cannot take away this comma and say Lagos, Nigeria, London, England, and Tokyo, Japan, because this makes no sense. Lagos, Nigeria is not a place. London, England is not a place. Tokyo, Japan is also not a place. So what we do here is we use comma to separate Lagos and Nigeria. And then we use a semicolon. We use a semicolon because we have now spoken about one thing. We are speaking about something else now, right? We use a semicolon because we are now moving into another location. London, comma, England. Then we use a semicolon right here because we're now moving into another location. Tokyo, comma, Japan. Once again, this list already contains commas. So using a comma to separate one location from an entirely different location would create some confusion. So in this case, semicolon serves as super commas. Now, commas are used to separate items in a list. Semicolons are used to separate items in a list that already contains commas. You see? So the semicolon indicates that this is a comma, but this is functioning as more than just a comma. This is actually separating these items completely. Another example is this sentence right here. The team includes Sarah, the project manager, David, the lead developer, and Rita, the graphic designer. Now, this contains commas, and using commas to separate them all just confuses everything. Because this list contains commas, semicolons are going to come in somewhere. Now, Sarah, the project manager. This is properly separated by commas. However, this and this are talking about two different things, and so we need to turn this into a semicolon. The semicolon means we have finished speaking about Sarah. Now we are talking about David. David, the lead developer. The comma makes sense. It signifies that yes, this I'm talking about is about David. Now that we finished speaking about David, we are moving into someone else. And at this point, it's appropriate to introduce a semicolon. And Rita, the graphic designer. Now the sentence makes sense. The team includes Sarah, the project manager, David, the lead developer, and Rita, the graphic designer. In this situation, the semicolon functions perfectly well. Another way to use a semicolon is if you want to connect a clause with another clause that begins with a transitional word such as however, therefore, furthermore, in fact, meanwhile, otherwise, and so on. You use semicolons after one clause and before these transition words. Here are some examples. Here we have two examples. The first said, I wanted to go for a run. The second said, however, it started to rain. Just before the words however, you're not going to put a comma. Nope. You're going to put a semicolon because a semicolon separates one clause from the other clause if it begins with however. A semicolon also separates one clause from the other clause if it begins with in fact. A semicolon separates one clause from the other clause if it begins with any of these words we see here. Now that's how to use semicolons.